Dungeon Masters of Reddit. What is the most useless item you gave your party that they were still able to exploit? Magical rubber duck. Turns whatever body of water it is in slowly into the perfect bath. As in warm and bubbly, chucked it in a piranha pit. About 20 minutes later, the piranhas were all dead from poisoning via soap. Floaty rock that gains loses buoyancy based on its temperature. As a warlock with prestidigitation, and a rope, I could use it to hover and float very slowly. Had no way to steer, but hey, useful when stuck in a pit, or on a high place. Rat flute that summons a horde of rats a la the Pied Piper, can also be used to control any rat-like being, including a criminal known as the Rat simply because he's a snitch. Had a lot of fun with that. I gave my players an amulet that lets them speak to rocks. The one player who picked it up spent most of that session talking to his new pet rock, and would often interrogate rocks they find at scenes for information, usually getting either vague info or stuff they can clearly see already, because it's a rock. Later on, another party member wanted to try talking to another rack, actually a pile of rocks made into a crude gravestone related to their character's backstory, only for the first party member to find out the amulet was cursed and they couldn't remove it. Later on they got it removed, and had the amulet identified, where I revealed that the amulet only let them think they could speak to rocks, and all the information they had asked of rocks was only information that was already known to them. They basically started using the now uncursed version of the amulets as a tool to ask me for information they had forgotten or needed clarity on, but in character, rather than just ask me out of character, which was great. Tweezers of boat bottling. You have gained the ability to put ships into bottles with these tweezers. Muffers were sneaking into dockyards at night and stealing entire fleets. And when the Navy finally caught on, they would sail away and toss said shrunken boats and bottles at the Navy boats following them, causing them to rapidly expand. Then they started to plan bottle boatception, putting bottle boats onto full-sized boats and then bottling that boat over and over again, effectively creating a dozen boats to rapidly expand in one town by tossing one bottle. I had to shut that down quick. Player, not DM, was given an article that only cast quicksand, that turned a certain volume of rock temporarily to quicksand. High-level characters. Bit of a gag gift. My halfling got it. Small army of orcs approaching us. Narrow bridge. DM expects a massive fight that's going to test our HP and empty magic items. Q central portion of stone bridge turning into quicksand and dropping into the gulf below. Totally cutting of the orcs. We strolled off at leisure. AKA, how to get the DM to blink in silent confusion for 3 minutes. Use's game ended hours early. I homebrewed the hat of many hats. It's a regular hat, but it's made of shiftwef, so it can have the appearance of any other hat. It was part of a shop selling dodgy knockoffs of regular magical items. In this case, the hat of disguise. The halfling who always struggled with RP took it, and it became a great way to get her more involved in what her character would do. It started when she transmuted herself and I'm with stupid baseball cap to tease one of the other party members after he'd come up with some bullshit plan, which led to one of the other players asking what this mysterious baseball was, and she just ran with it that it was a game they used to play back in her home region when they were kids. All of a sudden, she had a backstory, rather than just being I'm short and I stab things. I'm sure she would have come into RP eventually, but it was like giving her a dressing up box and seeing her realize that she could actually do things that weren't just purely mechanical. A random encounter in the woods got the players a crow mask that makes it so you can only call like a crow when wearing, based off a Slay the Spire item. It can be removed without issue, so it's a silly flavor item. However, the players are convinced it's the secret MacGuffin of this campaign, and keep trying to use it for everything. Most times are failures. But a few times, the stars align and it somehow works. They used it to calm a weird mutated child down, so that they could ask it questions to learn about an ambush. They used enlarge plus mask plus super high deception and performance roll to convince a cult that the fighter was a stronger god than the one they were worshipping. They constantly use it to make every town guard think they are too much trouble to be worth hassling. I gave the party a tiny bag of holding made of human skin. I don't remember why. They were trapped in a house fighting a zombie horde and they used the skin bag, turned it into a sort of Molotov bomb, used a spell to have it fly over the zombies, who followed the human skin away to be blown up. It was a 45-minute saga to get to that point, and it was easily the funniest and most creative moment I've seen from the DM side. We had a rack that if you were knocked out with it, You were completely invulnerable while unconscious. You had to successfully hit yourself or whoever and take damage from being knocked unconscious from a rock to the skull. That rock caused so much chaos, and death, and life, and permanent head trauma to NPCs we were trying to rescue. I once ran a very silly on-a-shit involving a number of joke items. The two my party came to love were a pair of angry shoes, who telepathically let their wearer know how angry they were at all times, and a hat that when left unwatched with another hat would breed to produce hybrid baby hats. Somehow, my party managed to place the angry shoe on top of the hat, so it was wearing it as a hat and therefore, by a wonderful technicality I allowed, close their eyes and flood the corridor with a swarm of magical angry baby hats that killed the mimics there in a tidal wave of felt brim and pure wrath. Maybe not exactly what you were looking for, but I've been looking for an excuse to tell this story. I had a party of wizard, ranger, druid, summoner and barbarian back in Pathfinder 1e. All of the party members except for the barbarian had some kind of pet, be it an animal companion, familiar, or just the menagerie of animals the druid accumulated. A few sessions in, and my barbarian sends me a text while the party's setting up camp. The barbarian volunteers to take a watch, and the next morning the rest of the party wakes up to the barbarian's new pet, Brock Darak. Brack was a stone with eyes and a mouth crudely carved into him. Brock goes on adventures with the party, and is mostly forgotten about until a premature fight with that Arxenbus. The boss wipes the floor with the party, leaving everyone unconscious except the barbarian who has single-digit HP. Not wanting to turnpike, and with the boss in surprisingly worse shape than I expected, I have him taunt the barbarian and start to fly away. Brack is going to take his attack, the barbarian says, throwing his pet with all his might. Crit, max damage on the roll, boss drops to -1 hit points and faciplants at the barbarian's feet for the coup de grace, also performed by Brock to finish what he started. And that's how our party's pet rock gained a temporary flight speed of 40 feet, and favored enemy, for both sorcerers. One of the players had gotten married to a pretty young NPC, who wasn't an adventurer. So I gave him a ring of conjugal visits that would transport him to his wife for an hour, then send him back to the adventuring group. The ring worked twice a week and was intended as a joke. When the party was beaten up from a hard combat, he used the ring and asked his wife where the nearest temple was, then bought healing potions from the local cleric. Soon this became a thing. Cure disease. Healing. Whatever. The ring became this guy's quick trip to the pharmacy, although he also always found a few moments for a quickie with his wife. Eventually he woke the up cleric at 3 a.m. to buy more potions. So I had the cleric throw a fit and yell at him never to come back. The player went back anyway, and the next time there was a bouncer at the temple door telling him to get lost. I gave my players a torch that couldn't be lit by normal means. After 2 or 3 sessions, one of them finally asked how to light it. I had totally forgotten about it by this point, so I made the NPC mention that it could only be lit by an Elder Red Dragon's Breath weapon, and once lit would burn forever. Suddenly, the entire party of 3rd and 4th level toons decides they want to veer off course and get this thing lit. My favorite magic item my players found was a totally homebrewed item with no real productive function, but they still got creative with it. They found the Pie Stone. Holding this stone in your hand and concentrating will fill a 25-foot radius area, with the stone as the center with the smell of a pie of your choice. This effect lasts for 10 minutes or until you dismiss the effect. The rogue used it to sneak past guard and as a distraction tactic when scouting and such. Not a DM, but the last campaign I was in. The DM gave us a regenerative oasis that only appears to people that need it. The party was messing around with throwing bones in it and bringing the animals they belonged to back to life. One of the other players had the thought to throw the hat of the deceased king into the water, and brought the king back to life because of a single hair. The DM hadn't even considered that possibility, because the session was supposed to be our beach episode. I gave my players a pig whistle. Once a day, they could blow the whistle and summon a pig. I hadn't given too much thought about it, but they used it constantly. They would send pigs off to spring traps. They would have impromptu luau's to curry favor with peasants. They never had to worry about rations again. Pork for dinner. I thought it was just a useless throwaway item, but they sure proved me wrong good times. We had barrels of rum we had liberated from a pirate ship hold, and came upon a cellar being used as a nest by an army of huge spiders. We soaked rats in rum and got the rats pissed drunk. then turned them loose in the spider room. They were eaten. The giant spiders were having a wild party by this point and going batshit. Then we charged in and hacked our way through without anyone dying. This was more rare than it should have been because we had a party of mostly flavorful squishy characters and were getting killed by things we shouldn't have on a regular basis. Players, I'm sorry, but this incredibly easy and obvious puzzle can't be solved. Also players, yes, this useless item can be used for genocide. Father of a DM here. During lockdown our 24-year-old son was living at home, so could play with his usual crew. So we agreed to Sunday morning family D&D sessions and actually quite enjoy it. His mum was a cook who had a magic ladle that could produce any liquid. I asked if she could throw the contents. He said it would have a 5-meter range. He was expecting her to produce a healing soup, and he had to Google hydrofluoric acid when I said she should lob it at some kobolds. I created an NPC werewolf character that was supposed to be a major villain in the campaign and stalked the players. It was a higher level than the PCs, so the idea was that they would need to flee every encounter and take measures to avoid being followed. Having someone on their tail constantly tracking them that could and would actually kill them was supposed to inject a sense of urgency into the game. On the first encounter, the werewolf was shown methodically slaying a large group of town guards and a high-ranking paladin. The characters were around level 5 or so. The NPC was probably CR 12 and would scale as they leveled. They interrupted the combat, and the idea was that they would attempt to fight the werewolf, who didn't consider them a threat initially, and so wouldn't just murder the whole party, see it killing a high-level character, and go oh shit, we need to run from it while it slaughtered the rest of the guards. So at first, they rush in to help and attack the werewolf, doing little damage because they don't have silver weapons, and I gave this particular NPC a regeneration ability only stopped by silver. I have the werewolf attack one of the players with a secondary bite attack, which should put them to fairly low health without killing them outright. That player pauses for a moment, and then asks if he can try to block the attack with his hand. I'm not sure what he's getting at, but I humor him and say he can do that with a DC 10 dexterity check, although it won't affect what kind of damage he takes. He succeeds. He then asks if he can jam his hand into the werewolf's mouth. I say, sure, but he's probably going to bite it off, and you'll need a new hand. He says even better. I describe the werewolf doing so. The rest of combat continues until the player's turn, who seems undisturbed by the loss of a hand, and on his turn he says I activate Qual's feather token to make a tree. This token is a magic one-time use item that creates a 5-foot diameter, 40-foot high tree. It's a handy utility item that our playgroup was fond of. Previously we'd used it to do things from just making bridges and crossing walls, to providing a druid with a way to use a particular spell and plant less areas that require trees. It didn't seem to have much use here. I ask him where on the board he's activating it. He points at the werewolf. I say that the most that's going to do is knock the werewolf prone, and he gets a fairly easy save to prevent that. He smiles. No, it's in the werewolf. What? How? I was holding it when he ate my hand. Me and the rest of the party are kind of silent for a second. I'm trying to think of a valid reason why this won't work. I fail. The werewolf now has a 5-foot wide tree growing out of him. The fact that he has regeneration doesn't particularly help when little bits of him are plastered on walls 20 feet away. The entire party celebrated, and they got a reward from the town. And an ally in the paladin who was supposed to be dead. I had to make a new NPC. Clever players are awesome. I gave my players a rock of gravity detection, which is exactly what it sounds like. They got it early on in the campaign, and when dropped it would accelerate until terminal velocity, to the nearest center of gravity. So basically it was a rock that would just act like a normal rock. Until way later in the campaign, they found themselves floating aimlessly through the astral plane searching for the soul of another player trapped in a keep on a small chunk of land that had been previously transported to the astral plane. They didn't have much to go on as, well, they were essentially floating in a void. Then one of my players pulls out the rock of gravity detection. I tried to argue that it's just a rock so it just floats there, but due to what I thought was a clever wording, my own wording, they argued it should accelerate towards the nearest center of gravity. Yeah, they found the keep. A wand of lesser summon. Only bringing out local creatures in celestial form. Fish. They picked fish. Just throwing trout in stacks to trigger traps and such. Need to slow down your pursuer. Many fish. Needed distraction? Fish's thrown object. I told them that it can summon literally any local creature, but on every character sheet was the word fish gun. In our very first session, the fighter just really wanted to steal from the quest giver's house, so I gave her an ornamental dagger that was basically useless outside of selling it 10 sessions later. They used it as a gift to bribe their way into a royal wedding.